September 5th, 1914. The HMS Pathfinder steams along her patrol at only 5 knots, coal shortages limiting her speed. Unbeknownst to her captain, the German U-boat U-21 is on a direct intercept course. At a range of just about 2,000 yards, U-21 launches its attack, a single Type G torpedo. Suddenly, a lookout spots the torpedo's wake in the water. The order is given, emergency evasive maneuvers, but within 5 minutes the torpedo strikes directly beneath the bridge and explodes. It sets off the ammo located in the frontal magazine, completely obliterating everything in front of the bridge and tearing the ship in half. The ship sank very quickly, along with all but 19 of its crew. This would mark the first time a ship was sunk by a self-propelled torpedo fired from a submarine, and obviously it would not be the last. To truly understand how the Germans revolutionized submarine warfare, we first need to understand what made them turn to submarines, or U-boats, in the first place. Ironically, it was the British rather than the Germans who fully realized the potential of the submarine in combat. In fact, before the war, the German Imperial Admiralty staff saw the submarine as an experimental waste of money, and would have most likely not even used them if the Kaiser, who was impressed by them after taking a ride in one, overruled the Admiralty and ordered the development and integration of a U-boat fleet into the Navy. Now as for why the Kaiser was impressed by a 45-degree, slow-moving, cramped metal tube is anyone's guess. In 1914, Germany only had 28 submarines in service, just over a third of what the UK had. Germany didn't really consider them as anything more than vessels to counterattack a blockaded port along with torpedo boats, but this would all change in September. The aforementioned sinking of the HMS Pathfinder on the 5th of September, paired with the actions of SMU-9, which sunk 3 British cruisers on its own 3 weeks later, proved to the German Admiralty that submarines could be offensive weapons, capable of sinking enemy ships. Additionally, the British, who were now wary of the German U-boat fleet, began working on anti-submarine measures. They quickly picked up on the fact that the submarines of the time were very slow, and could not keep up with most warships, even on the surface. An erratic zigzag course would have also prevented German subs from mounting any sort of successful attack. In response to this, the Germans began targeting merchant ships. At first, the Germans tried to respect the cruiser rules, which specify that the crew of an attacking ship are supposed to board and inspect the merchant ship's cargo, and only sink her if she was found to be carrying cargo that benefited the enemy after letting the crew escape. As can be expected, these rules were inefficient and impractical, as most merchant ships could simply outrun a U-boat. Furthermore, as the war progressed, more merchant ships were also equipped with weapons. The submarines of the time could not sustain much damage, with a single shot being more than enough to take them out in most cases. This led some submarine commanders to bend or outright break the rules. These cases were rare at first, but as time passed, nearly every submarine commander followed the doctrine of sink first, ask questions later. Near the start of 1915, Germany declared the waters around the United Kingdom a war zone, kicking off the start of unrestricted submarine warfare. This development allowed submarines to target any ships they came across, and in the first month of this policy, 29 ships were sunk. Now to put this into context, over the past 6 months, only 19 ships were sunk. However, these sinkings would also damage the relations with a lot of neutral countries, particularly the United States. Germany didn't want the US to join the war, and the sinkings of the Lusitania and the Arabic continued to sway public opinion in the US, causing Germany to abandon this use of unrestricted submarine warfare. Regardless, the first 7 months of the war were incredibly successful for the Germans, with over 350 merchant ships sunk. Despite these successes, the war itself was progressing poorly from the Germans. Their plan for a quick victory was now a distant memory in the reality of this new modern war, and their people grew more and more unhappy by the day. German High Command then decided to intensify unrestricted submarine warfare. They knew that this would more than likely bring the US into the war, but they believed that they could starve the British into submission faster than the US could mobilize. Even though this plan sounded a little overambitious, keep in mind that they could look back on the success of yet another plan they had. You know, the one to quickly knock a country out of the war before its bigger ally could mobilize. Yeah, worked out great the first time, right? Regardless of this, Germany estimated that a net sinking of about 600,000 tons a month would be enough to starve the British out in just 6 months. And then, just as this started to look like it could work, it all came crashing down. The Allies introduced the Convoy system, and this saw an immediate impact. Almost instantly, convoyed ships saw a dramatic drop in loss rates, while subs would start to see a steadily increasing loss rate. This was met by an increased brutality from the Germans, attacking previously ignored ships, like hospital ships. Regardless, convoys stopped German subs from having a tangible impact on British shipping, and new advances in anti-submarine warfare would see this plan completely backfire. The last years of the war would see U-boats unable to even come close to the numbers they once achieved. The war was looking increasingly like it was a lost cause for the Germans. Over these several months, the effectiveness of submarines would slowly drop, almost 350,000 tons sunk in March, to just under 200,000 tons sunk in September. When the war ended, Germany was forced to give up its submarine fleet, and the Treaty of Versailles banned the development and construction of new U-boats. Despite the success of the anti-submarine tactics, they still managed to reach a level of effectiveness no one ever thought possible. For the 178 U-boats lost during the war, they managed to sink around 5,000 ships and over 12 million tons of cargo. Suddenly, a country with a weaker navy could devastate the shipping and trade of a much stronger country. This would prove a revolution in submarine warfare, the first by Germany, but not its only one. 21 years later, war had once again engulfed Europe. Despite the Treaty of Versailles banning the construction of submarines, Germany had found a number of workarounds. Germany created companies in other countries, as well as establishing the Anglo-German Naval Agreement in 1935, limiting the Kriegsmarine to only 35% of the strength of the Royal Navy. This would allow Germany to build submarines freely, though it should be noted that they had already built 10 submarines before this treaty was announced, and by 1939, 65 submarines were ready for combat. It would not just be plain sailing for German U-boats, however, as over these past 20 years, anti-submarine warfare has taken some large strides. Radar and sonar development would make submarines easier to detect, and aircraft development would allow aircraft to not only report German submarines across longer ranges, but now they would also be able to attack them, something they could not do during the First World War. On top of all of this, they still had to get around the convoy system that halted their effectiveness towards the tail end of World War I. Now getting back to the Second World War, Germany knew that its Kriegsmarine was no match for the Royal Navy. Submarines would once again be at the forefront of this new battle for the Atlantic. The day that Britain declared war on Germany, German U-boat U-30 torpedoed and sank the SS Athenia, a passenger liner heading for Montreal. This made it clear to everyone that Germany had every intention to use unrestricted submarine warfare once again. Placed under the command of Admiral Dönitz, German submarines saw success in the initial stages of World War II. Despite this, convoys were still proving a major obstacle for submarines, one that would only become more and more difficult to deal with. During this initial stage, German U-boats saw most of their success attacking unescorted merchant ships, as well as laying newly created magnetic mines. Despite this, German submarines never accomplished anything special in this initial stage, something that was about to change. On the 25th of June, France fell, leaving the UK standing alone against the Axis. This would allow Hitler to turn all his attention to defeating the UK, meaning the submarine campaign would get a lot more attention. Around this time, the Germans decided to switch to nighttime raiding, substantially increasing the submarine's effectiveness. Furthermore, France had a lot of ports that had fallen into German hands, and a lot more land they could build new ports on, decreasing the travel time it took German submarines to reach the Atlantic. Now, on top of all of that, the British were forced to keep a large chunk of their navy close to home as the threat of a German invasion was high. During these first few months after the fall of France, German nighttime hit-and-run tactics were proving successful. As the months passed, this tactic would work well, but because only one U-boat would attack, it would maybe sink one ship and have to pull back. Keep in mind that some of these convoys had dozens of ships, and losing only one would never have the effect on the British Admiral Dönitz envisioned his U-boats having. This led him to create a new strategy, one that would devastate Allied commerce. The Germans called this new strategy Rudeltaktik, or pack tactic. This is in reference to how some animals hunt in packs to take down bigger, more dangerous prey. The Allies went on to call them something different, a name we all know them today as wolf packs. How this tactic would work was first, German intelligence would relay the approximate locations for an Allied convoy. Several U-boats were then instructed to move in a patrol along a long line that would intersect with the convoy's proposed route. As soon as a U-boat spotted the convoy, it would radio in its position and tail it until the other U-boats arrived. Then, under the cover of night, the U-boats would attack in unison, releasing all their torpedoes at the same time. This attack would generally overwhelm the convoy escorts. Sometimes, the U-boats would even attack from the inside of the convoy. This would often give the best results, but it would also be the most dangerous. In the end, they would pull back, leaving the convoy trying to rescue hundreds or sometimes thousands of men in the water. A quarter to even half of the convoyed ships were lost to these initial attacks, despite the convoys being well defended. These results were so devastating, it looked like Admiral Dönitz's vision to take down Britain using submarines could become a reality. Months of this would continue, and while U-boats wouldn't always win, they would often manage to sink more than they would lose. This status quo was maintained up until the 22nd of June, Operation Barbarossa. As Germany would move to focus on the Eastern Front, the aircraft tied up in the defense of Britain would once again be able to assist in anti-submarine warfare over the Atlantic. The British would also start convoying their ships the whole length of the Atlantic, and America, despite still being neutral, extended their Pan-American security zone all the way to Iceland. 1942 would have U-boats see their greatest success, sinking more than 100 ships a month. The majority of U-boats would operate past the range of Allied air cover, as this would often yield the best outcome for them, which resulted in the Allies referring to this area of the Atlantic as the Black Pit. This year, the Germans came closest to crippling the UK with submarines, with 1,200 merchant ships sunk, 2,000 since the war began. As the Battle of the Atlantic raged on, so too did German U-boats venture further than before. Shipping began being sunk off the coasts of Brazil and West Africa. This would be overshadowed by the Mid-Atlantic Gap, the aforementioned Black Pit being closed as US-built B-24s had the range to fly reconnaissance and attack missions over it. Merchant aircraft carriers, an increased number of escort ships, and new strides in radar technology would result in less than 300 ships, a quarter of the previous year, being sunk. Germany tried everything to turn the tide back in their favor, including introducing their new Wunderwaffe, the Type 21 submarine. This was a revolutionary design, able to go as fast submerged as it could on the surface. It would also be able to stay submerged for several days, making it much more difficult to spot by Allied aircraft. This, however, was not enough, as Allied air power was so absolute that U-boats were at risk of being attacked as soon as they left port. On top of this, these new Type 21s were unable to be mass-produced, with only 4 seeing service by the end of the war. In the end, Allied air power, something submarines could not counter, completely changed the War of the Atlantic. So in summary, Germany twice revolutionized submarine warfare. The first, unrestricted submarine warfare, which allowed submarines to capitalize on their strengths and attack targets, albeit questionably. This resulted in them becoming such a threat to wartime commerce, the Allies saw fit to completely ban Germany from making any more in the Treaty of Versailles. The second, wolf packs, which allowed German U-boats to effectively counter the convoy system, almost bringing the United Kingdom to its knees. It wasn't until new long-range aircraft and improvements to radar technology that German wolf packs were effectively countered. In the end, despite not being able to alter the outcome of either war, these new strategies terrified the British, with Winston Churchill saying, "The only thing that ever frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril," in 1946. They were highly effective, only failing when Germany overextended itself to the point it didn't have adequate resources and equipment at the tail end of both world wars. Thank you for watching. If you made it to this point, chances are you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please remember to drop a like and subscribe for more videos like this. This video is made part of a larger collaboration of 17 different YouTube channels, focusing on naval history across all of history. And if you want to see more from the 20th century, I would recommend checking out M. Laser's video on the Austro-Hungarian Navy and Potential History's video on the Battle of Samar.